we're going to do 1x12 conversion on this older 3x10 bike. Should be pretty straightforward. A few parts that we need. We can do this relatively budget, and it's going to greatly improve the ability for this bike to be used as a mountain bike. We'll have a clutch, rear derailleur, so no more chain slap, single ring at the front to eliminate the front shifting, and then we'll have a much bigger range in the back with the super wide 1x12. So first things first is we need to take all the old parts off the bike, and then we can go ahead and start swapping parts on. That's it. All right. All right, everyone. Now, before I dive into the process that I went through for upgrading this older bike to a 1x12 system, I do want to briefly talk you through the various options I was considering when deciding which parts to suggest. Now, this bike that belongs to my friend actually used to belong to me. I gave it to him as a gift, and having ridden it and owned it, I sort of know what it is lacking and what it's good at. And one of the things that it's lacking really is a modern drivetrain, most specifically a clutched drivetrain. Whenever I rode the bike on anything that was sort of bumpy on a downhill, and even cross-country style trails, you're going to get some chain slap. It's not going to shift really well when it's shaking all over the place. And a 3x10 is really just not that intuitive to use when you're mountain biking, when you need to make sort of quick gear changes. If you're going through a sort of flowy course from a downhill to a steep uphill, you want to be able to really quickly just dump gears in either direction, and a 1x12 does that and a 3x10 does not. So I want to just say off the bat, really almost any bike, any vintage bike that has at least an 8-speed cassette on there currently, it can be upgraded to a 1x12 really easily. I'll talk about the sort of free hub compatibility in a few moments here, but just know that anything that sort of came with at least an 8-speed free hub, you can upgrade. And so even some vintage rigid bikes. I have a vintage Bridgestone MB3 that I converted to 1x12 a couple years ago, and that really made the bike a lot more fun. So let me talk you through sort of the two options that you have here. I'm going to say the major options are SRAM or Shimano. Obviously, there are some other more niche options. You can go with, Rotor. They make a 1x13 system. There's Microshift, which is sort of a knockoff of other, Shimano and SRAM systems. There's Box, which is sort of a newer company. Well, it's not necessarily newer. It's been pretty big in sort of BMX, but it's sort of been getting into the mountain bike game in recent years. But I think those other options are really going to be secondary to the big SRAM or Shimano options. A drivetrain is something that you're interfacing with all the time, right? You're constantly shifting up and down when you're mountain biking. You want it to work, right? You don't want something that's going to mostly work. You want it to always work. And I've found that having ridden both Shimano and SRAM, both sort of upper end and sort of mid-range, they work very well, right? They both have their pros and cons. But let me sort of talk you through the two major options here. So this project was always meant to be sort of more budget project. Now you could obviously go with whatever you want, right? If you want to go XX1 Eagle, you want to go XTR, of course you can do that, right? You can spend as much as you want. But if you want to do this on a budget, which I think is what a lot of people might be looking to be doing, given the fact that it's probably going to be an older bike you're converting, and you don't necessarily want to spend more than the value of the bike on just parts to convert it over, right? So with that being said, I was really looking at either NX Eagle, mostly on the SRAM side, and Dior, mostly on the Shimano side. So let me sort of run you through the different parts and their prices. I have a bit of a spreadsheet here, which I can show you guys, which talks about the new cost as well as the used cost for each part, given that you can obviously buy new, which you have the benefit of it being new, and you can usually always find it new somewhere. You don't have to hunt around too much. But used, you can really save a good chunk of change if you buy used. I buy a lot of my parts used, as long as you sort of do your due diligence. Bike parts are ultimately relatively simple. It's not like there's a lot that can go wrong with them. So you can obviously mix and match. Buy a few things new, buy some things used. So let me walk you through the options here. So on the shifter, the NX Eagle, you're looking at either $32 for new or about $20 I found used. And then for Shimano, the Dior 12-speed shifter, you're looking again at $32 new, and the best I could find used is about $25. The one thing I will say off the bat is it's much harder to find used Shimano Dior components. The whole bike industry supply chain problems are still a thing right now, and for whatever reason, Shimano is just harder to source than SRAM. So that is something to keep in mind. If time is of the essence, or if you want to buy used, SRAM might be a better option. Okay. Crankset, for SRAM, you kind of have two options here. You could go NX Eagle, or you could also go Truvative Stylo. Truvative is owned by SRAM, and I found that Truvative Stylo is actually closer to the GX Eagle in terms of performance, but for about the same price as the NX Eagle. So you can choose either one. It's 107 new, about $70 used is what I found, 70 to 80. But I would prefer the Truvative, which is what I went with for my friend's build here. Dior crankset, you're looking at about 95 new or 85 used. Again, you're not going to see as much of a difference between new and used on Shimano because there's just less of this stuff used. Derailleur, NX Eagle derailleur 12-speed is going to be 115 new or 70 used. A lot of people take them off because a lot of bikes that have nicer frames but on the lower end builds come with NX Eagle, so a lot of people take them off and sell them right away. Dior, now Dior is actually a good bit cheaper if you can find it new, 57, although most of the places I found online were sold out at the $57 price range. What you can do with Shimano, although I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it, is that there are quite a few sort of gray market dealers on eBay that sell supposedly genuine Shimano parts. They're probably OEM parts, right? They're meant to be put on complete builds and not sold individually. You're probably not going to get a warranty through Shimano for them, but you will find a pretty steep discount. So if you want to go that way, I can't speak to the genuineness of these products or these parts or how genuine they are. I believe most of them are genuine, right? It'd be very hard for a factory to sort of retool to make fake Dior rear derailleurs, right? A chain maybe, but a rear derailleur is pretty complicated. A shifter is relatively complicated. It's probably genuine, just something that was sort of maybe diverted off the assembly line or packaged for OEM and then sold individually anyways. They're all going to be shipped from China or Taiwan, so they will take a little bit longer to get here, but you can save some money. I wouldn't personally go that way, but that is an option that you do have. Chain for both SRAM and Shimano, I went new. You don't really want to use chain, right? It's a wear item, so $28 for SRAM, $25 for Shimano. And then bottom bracket, same deal. Just get it new because it comes with all the spacers you need. And you will need some different spacers depending on which kind of bike frame you're putting it on. So get the new one that has the kit with all the spacers. SRAM, $33. Shimano XT, $25. And then the big difference is the cassette. So for SRAM, you can go with the NX Eagle cassette, $108 new, about 75 used. And this will fit on older 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-speed hubs, right, with the sort of standard Shimano free hub body that most bikes have, most older bikes have, right? If you upgrade to a GX, X01, XX1 Eagle cassette, then you need the new XD driver, which is only on the newer hubs. So you might have to actually either swap out your hub, which is expensive and requires special wheel building tools, or buy a whole new wheel set. And it's hard to find an XD hub on like a 26er wheel set, which a lot of these older mountain bikes have, right? With the NX Eagle though, it uses the old style hub. It just fits on, and it's also cross compatible. So even if you are using the nicer X01, XX1, GX components, you can still run the older NX Eagle cassette. It's obviously a little bit heavier than the nicer ones, but you have no compatibility problems. And this is, for me, the big downside with Shimano, is that all of their 12-speed offerings require the new Shimano microspline free hub body, which isn't produced by a lot of hub manufacturers, right? They've only licensed it to a few. And again, you'd have to swap out the hub to run the proprietary Dior cassette, right? So your option is you could run the NX Eagle cassette, or you could do a sort of third party like a Sunrace or a ZTTO, one of those sort of Amazon brands. I've heard relatively good things about Sunrace. Obviously it's not going to be as good as the genuine Shimano one, but a lot of people have run it on their Shimano drivetrains without any issues. It's about $100 new on Amazon, and then 60 or so used is what I found. But you're not going to be getting a genuine Shimano product for the cassette. So that is one big downside. So you would have to, factor in the cost of a new free hub body at least, if you can convert your old one, but most likely a whole new hub, and then potentially new spokes, and then, the cost of of rebuilding the wheel if you want to go Shimano. So in the end, I had my friend try out both my SRAM and my Shimano mountain bikes, had him click through the gears, and he ended up liking the feeling of the SRAM ones better. It was a GX Eagle, so a little bit nicer than the NX Eagle, whereas I did have him try a Dior shifter, but the NX Eagle, from what I've noticed from just sort of testing this bike after I built it, it shifts pretty well. As good as GX? Probably not, but close enough, right? And for definitely a much cheaper price. So if you're going to go new on everything SRAM, you're looking at $423. For used, I got about $296. Obviously, that may vary a little bit, but you can probably squeeze in under $300 on SRAM. Shimano new with the Sunrace cassette, you're looking at $334. So actually a pretty good deal. And then $277 used. So not a huge difference between new and used. I would probably go new if I were to go Shimano. Shimano's really nice. Like, I have Dior on my Ibis, my Ripmo. It shifts really, really well. But you are going to have a little bit of a harder time finding it right now, just given the supply chain limitations. So again, SRAM Shimano, you can't really go wrong with either. We went SRAM with this one, but you'd be happy with either option. And we can do this all for under $300 no matter which option you go with, right? So I think you definitely do this for a budget, and it's going to greatly, greatly increase the rideability of the bike, just make it more modern. So in the end, we went with SRAM with all the parts I listed here, NX everything except for the chain, which was GX Eagle. I had one left over I gave to him. But I think no matter which way you go, you'll definitely greatly enjoy the improvements of the bike. So enjoy the rest of the video. Here's the process, and watch through the end to see our comments and sort of impressions from the new shifting setup. All right, enjoy the video. How long is this fucking...
These circles.
And here are all the parts that we bought. We bought these all used. This is an NX Eagle cassette. Then we have a dub bottom bracket, also used. This is an NX Eagle rear derailleur with a GX Eagle chain. It's in the wrong packaging, but it's GX Eagle. NX shifter, again, new takeoff, bought used, or for the used price. I did have to buy a clamp adapter because this did not come with it, so that's something to factor in if you're buying used. And then Truvative Stylo crankset, which is a takeoff from one of my other bikes, as I upgraded that crankset. But I did have to buy a new chainring to account for that. This is not a boost frame, and we need to adjust for that.
How do you go down? Oh, yeah. Wait, what? Oh, that. Okay.
That's upside down. That's upside down. There you go.
It's that? So you have to go in?
Yeah.
This is not a thing.
Alright, now we come to the subject of the bottom bracket. Now the bottom bracket can be a little bit challenging to figure out just because there's a lot of different standards, different diameters or widths of the spindle, different lengths of the bottom bracket shell or widths of the bottom bracket shell. There's a bunch of stuff there. The nice thing I like about SRAM is that a lot of their cranks use this dub system, and what's nice about it is that it really is almost universal, right? This bottom bracket shell, for example, it works with threaded bottom brackets, which this bike has. It'll work with both 68 or 73 millimeter bottom bracket shells. All you need is a set of spacers to go along with it. Now, when you buy a bottom bracket new, it'll come with a good amount of spacers, and you should be able to figure out what you need from those that are included. Unfortunately, this was a used bottom bracket, which obviously was cheaper, but I had to buy some new spacers. So I got this whole bag, a little overpriced. It was 15 bucks at a local bike shop, cheaper online, but I wanted to get the job done. But this should have everything I need to get the bottom bracket installed correctly. So the first thing you really need to do is to figure out the width of your bottom bracket shell, right? Once you determine what kind of bottom bracket it has, right? Whether it's threaded, right? Whether it's press fit, stuff like that. You should be able to figure it out. And the dub bottom brackets, there will be one that works for the bike you're working on, right? So mine is threaded, that's obvious. The first thing I had to do was measure the shell, and so all you gotta do is measure the bottom of the shell, and if it's either 68 or 73 millimeters, that determines what kind of spacer setup you need for the bottom bracket. Most older frames with threaded bottom bracket shells will have 68 millimeter shells, which is what we have here. According to SRAM, this requires a 2.5 millimeter spacer on each side between the bottom bracket and the frame, and then a 4.5 millimeter on the drive side. We then torque these up to 40 Newton meters, and once that is done, we can go ahead and install our crankset. Alright, so now we come to the subject of the crankset. So these cranksets, again, because we're using the dub bottom bracket, we're not going to have any issues with the spindle because it's appropriate 28.99 millimeter diameter of the spindle. The thing we do need to be aware of, though, is the chainring. And so essentially most new mountain bikes are either going to be boost or super boost spacing, which is really just the spacing of the frame, right? How wide it is. The chain line is dependent on this, okay? And so the chain rings are made as to essentially remove the necessity for different cranksets, right? Rather than having all these different widths of cranksets, this one's meant to be more universal, where you just sort of adjust the preload, and then you can just swap out a different chain ring. So they make 3 millimeter, 0 millimeter, and 6 millimeter offset chain rings. This is I believe it's a 3 millimeter, which is what is used for boost. Now, because this came off a boost bike, it would work on there. It's not going to work on this bike, which is the traditional non-boost setup. And so what we need to do is we need to swap out this chain ring for a non-boost 6 millimeter offset chain ring. And so basically it's, it's just a chain ring, right? You can choose whatever size teeth you want, how many teeth you want. This is 30, so this old one's 34, which is a little bit more, a little bit harder to pedal. And if you're really doing more mellow, chill trail rides, 30 or 32 is really a better bet. So I think he's going to enjoy this, and it's a very easy operation. So the only thing holding this on is going to be these 3 T25 Torx bolts. And so we just got to unscrew those. Then we take our new chainring, and these are the steel ones from SRAM, which are a little bit cheaper. So you can actually do this relatively budget friendly, right? You don't need to, there are more expensive ones, obviously the lighter ones, stuff like that. But the steel ones are a pretty good deal. I believe they're about $20, which is really not bad at all. So we just line up the holes. So SRAM does supply these new chainring bolts. There's 3 of them, which already come pre-thread locked with this green thread locker here. And so we're just going to go ahead, drop those on our crankset. And so these guys get torqued down to 70 to 80 inch-pounds of torque. I have it set at about 75 right now, somewhere in the middle. It's a good idea to do these in a circular pattern. Anytime you're attaching anything that has sort of a multiple bolts and it needs to hold it to a flat face, it's a very good idea to sort of do a either circular sort of star pattern, right, and tighten them down evenly so that no single bolt is putting more pressure than the other ones, or that it gets installed at an angle. This crankset gets torqued down to 54 Newton meters. This is quite a bit, and it's going to be hard to do on the stand, so you may want to put the bike on the ground just to get additional leverage. Alright, so we're nearing the finish line here. The next thing we need to do is we need to size the chain properly. So I've got this GX Eagle chain here. Now, the SRAM instructions indicate that you need to basically measure the overlap. So while Shimano has you measure it at the back, for SRAM you measure it at the overlap here. Now, what you want to do is you want to route the chain through your chain ring at the front, make sure it's in the teeth, right, correctly engaged. And then you want to wrap it around your biggest cog in the rear, okay? So you want to go front chain ring and rear, largest cog, and then you're going to measure the overlap at the bottom here. All right, so now we've got to calculate chain length. There's a bunch of videos online to show you how to do this. It depends on whether you're doing SRAM or Shimano. For SRAM, for a hardtail, it's going to be different if you have a full suspension or an oval chain ring. We have a circular chain ring and a hardtail, so that makes our life a little bit easier. So basically, you got to find the overlap and where the chain would meet, which is going to be right here, right? And then from there, you want to essentially add 2 full links, right? And so that's basically going to be where it would actually meet. So we would have cut it here, right? This is where we cut for it to be perfect, the 2 that would meet with the power link. So instead, we want to add 2 full links. So it's going to be a half, and then 1, 2, which means that we're going to cut it right here. And that will give us the correct length. It's always better to err on the side of a little bit too long rather than too short. You can always cut off another link. You can't really add another link unless you want to add a bunch of quick links, which is really not ideal. So I found the chain length I want. And now I just go ahead and I split the chain with my chain tool. There she goes. Now we can feed the chain through the rear derailleur. What I really like about SRAM is this derailleur lock here, which essentially locks the cage. It makes getting the wheels on and off really, really easy. It also makes installing the chain much easier. This is honestly just a really, really great technology. I really enjoy it. I think it makes the bike so much more easy to work on. So I'm a huge fan, although you have to sort of remind yourself which way the chain goes. It's going to go over this. Now you have to make sure you get it under all the sort of cage little bumps here, or all these little cages. So you have to make sure that you have to actually get the chain through there, not over it. That's one of the most common mistakes people make, is they actually have the chain that's going to hit that, and you don't want that. So route it carefully, make sure it has a clear path through the pulley wheels. Maybe avoid getting it all wrapped up like I did. Oops. And just feed it through. That looks good to me. So here we have our new SRAM quick link. Now it's important to know that this is directional. There is a small arrow on the quick link which tells you which direction the chain needs to be directed, right? So essentially, if you're installing it at the bottom, you want it facing back, right? Because as you pedal the bike, the chain's going to be going that way at the bottom, and it's going to be going forward on the top. So we just go ahead and we place our quick link over here. Place it over here. Alright, so now that we have the chain routed through and we've adjusted the cable tension, we now need to set the B tension screw and mess with the limit screws. Now, what I've found with these SRAM derailleurs is that the B tension is extremely important. If that's off, it's not going to shift right. Now, SRAM does make a tool which helps you set the B tension screw properly. It's actually it's a tool that works really well. It's just a cheap piece of plastic. It comes with all new SRAM derailleurs. If you buy something used, like we did here, then, well, I had one of these hanging around, but you can buy these at a bike shop for a few bucks or buy them online. But essentially what you want to do is you want to shift the derailleur into the second largest cog in the rear, and then you're going to place this on the largest, and then just slide it down until it hits the pulley wheel. Now what you're trying to do is get this little white arrow to match up with the center of this pulley wheel right here, this little metal bit, right? As you can see here, we're quite a ways off right now. It needs to come out this way. And so all we gotta do is we adjust the B tension screw. So then if we adjust the B tension screw, turning the screw in or tightening it will move the derailleur out, and then loosening it will move it back towards the front of the bike. So we need to move it out until we can get it right into the correct spot. That looks pretty good to me. And now this should enable us to shift into the largest cogs without the pulley wheels hitting the cogs, right, the cassette. What happens if this is too tight is that these pulley wheels, the teeth, will actually interface with the teeth on the cassette and will cause it to not shift right and can damage both the derailleur and the cassette, or most likely the derailleur wheels since they're plastic. But that's not what you want. So once you have that set properly, you may have to reset your limit screws. You may have to reset your limit screws after doing this adjustment because it will throw them off a little bit, I've found. So I usually like to get my limit screws close, then I do the B adjustment, and then I go back to the limit screws to dial everything in. Alright, so now we've got our limit screw set, we have our B tension set, I've double checked everything. It's going to take a little bit of fiddling around, right? It is sometimes a little bit annoying, but you will eventually get it just right. Just understand what each little screw is doing, right? There's plenty of great videos that explain it in great detail. But just figure out what you're doing, take your time, don't get too frustrated. If you get frustrated, walk away from it for a minute, come back to it, and you'll eventually get it shifting just perfect. So I feel like I've got this really nice right now. So we can see here, all the way down is no issue. Back up. And you'll see here, it's not wanting to make that shift, so I'm just making a micro adjustment on the shifter tension with the barrel adjuster. And still struggling a little bit. There we go. And working our way down. And that looks really good to me. So everything is shifting nice and smooth. Now obviously you're going to want to test this with actually riding the bike, because the weight's going to shift on the bike stand is going to be a little bit different than how it shifts with your weight on it. So I like to leave a little bit of a longer cable, not this whole length. I'll cut off some, but leave a little bit of a longer cable in case I need to adjust that a little bit more. And, you know, this is just the first round. I'll go ride it, see how it feels, and then I'll make any final adjustments I need to do. Hey guys, we're out here at Saratoga Gap Trail in Los Trancos Forest, or whatever it's called. Sit rep on the 1x conversion since I've gone on a few rides. It's feeling great. The lower, easier gears are amazing for climbing. It's very reactive when I'm switching. The hard gear is good for when I need to sprint or hit some straight sections. And how's the clutch and the derailleur on the rocky descents? No, there's no chain slap at all. Yeah. Very tight, very quick with everything, and it just feels great. And it's at good intervals where I can still perform slightly different on some sort of techie climbs or rocky sections. So yeah, overall very pleased. Money well spent? Money well spent. Super pumped, makes you want to MTB harder. And yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. Signing off from Garrett's Saratoga Gap Trail. Peace out. Peace out. All right. Don't forget to smash that like button.